Welcome to the Freedom Project podcast, a movement to restore what's been lost. We believe that true freedom starts with aligning every part of life with God's design, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, emotionally, relationally, financially, and in our character. These are the 7 pillars of a life well lived, and if even one is out of alignment, we feel it. Our mission is to equip people like you with the biblical truth and practical insight you were never taught. The foundational education that should have been passed down but wasn't. Through powerful conversations with thought leaders, experts, and real-world disciples, we're building stronger citizens, healthier families, and more resilient communities. This is about transformation of individuals, communities, and a nation, one life at a time. As Philippians 4:7 reminds us, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guide your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Let's seek that peace. Let's pursue that freedom. This is the Freedom Project. All right. Welcome to the next episode of the Freedom Project podcast with Nurse for That. And so today we have an awesome guest, Dr. McWherter. And Kaylee, you've worked with him for quite a while, so I want to have you introduce him and take it away.
Absolutely. Well, a lot of you are familiar with Dr. McWherter because he's been a doctor here in Fort Worth for over 40 years. How many years exactly, Dr. McWherter?
Well, I'm closing in on 48 years.
That's what I thought. I thought we were closer to 50, but...
I won't reveal my age yet, but that's a very good estimate. Okay.
So, yes, you've been in Fort Worth that entire time. And then how we met was I was looking for a medical director because I wanted to start concierge medicine, and you said yes. And I think it's gone pretty well so far.
It's gone very well because the services you offered are very, very helpful now in our aging population and even for our younger population.
Well, good. I'm glad. So Dr. McWherter runs the FEM Center in Fort Worth and Colleyville. And then Nurse for That is kind of his subset concierge company. So we do this together and it's so much fun. And so I'll let you take it away, Dr. McWherter. What do you want to share about? Your resume is very long, so I want to let you share your favorite part.
Well, the older you are, your resume increases in length, but the bottom line is I started studying medicine about 50 years ago, and I've been practicing for an extended period of time. I think this is a important thing to consider, that aging is really a chronic disease mediated event. And as we get in a more toxic society with all these contaminants, we have to learn to go to a different type of medicine. And you have to practice for 40 to 45 years to understand what needs to be done for chronic disease. So I guess in my case, being older with less hair and being gray, white hair has proved to be beneficial. It's one of the few jobs that the older I get, the more in demand I become. But it's such a pleasure to be here today to talk about, misconceptions or to discuss current issues. And thank you for having me today.
Well, we're very grateful because we know your time is limited. Today, we're going to discuss hormones. That's really trending right now, especially because just this month, the FDA backpedaled on something. Can you explain really what that was about? Because it's kind of confusing to the masses.
This is probably one of the most significant medical reversals that I've ever seen. It's kind of like the discovery that bacteria causes disease. Unfortunately, 23 years ago, the FDA made a major medical mistake. I call it a black eye for the FDA and a black box warning for hormones. And when I say hormones, I'm talking about estrogen and progesterone. They've had a reversal now, which is actually 23 years overdue. And it was a tragic mistake when they put black box warnings on estrogen and progesterone causing breast cancer. 50 to 70 million women stop their hormones at this point in time. And this has turned out to be a disaster. Now, we have a lost generation of women who've now not been on hormone therapy because of a major mistake that was media-driven on a faulty study called the WHI. So the WHI, to me, which is the Women's Health Initiative, was terminated in 2002 it really tells you everything that you shouldn't do. It doesn't tell you what you should do. And when you look at this WHI study, I found it very interesting. I've made a study of this for almost 2 decades. There were no OB-GYNs that sat on the committee that set up the WHI study. There were cardiologists, internists, and number crunching epidemiologists. So the study was directed toward cardiovascular disease, with breast cancer being a secondary effect. So the premise was really faulty at its setup. When the announcement was prematurely made, it had not been vetted by experts. So the wrong conclusions were put out. The media picked this up, and then it turned into a tragedy. So I think this is very appropriate today. And as you can see, I have some strong feelings toward it, but the FDA finally has come to grips that they made a mistake. Unfortunately, we have lost a fair number of women, estimated to be 40 to 49,000 women who have died prematurely of heart disease as a result of these black box warnings.
Wait. Can you kind of told me this the other day. I remember. So you're saying that what happened is that study came out, women just stopped their hormones abruptly. And what caused the deaths?
So remember, estrogen is the major hormone to stop inflammation. And the old saying is that the 4 medical horsemen of the apocalypse, being diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, heart disease, and cancer, ride the steeds of chronic inflammation. Remember, chronic inflammation is the underlying cause for the chronic disease of aging. Estradiol is the strongest hormone and one of the strongest molecules I know of that stops inflammation. So if you look at a woman who goes into menopause, where she loses all of her, or a significant part of her estradiol, that's when the aging process really begins. That's when her waistline blows out. That's when all these symptoms begin to occur. So what they tell women is, no, don't do that. Stop your estrogen. Oh, yeah. We know now that because of this, women had a 48% increase in mortality over the last 2 decades, where our men had only a 3% increase. Alzheimer's shot straight up when you look at the graphs. So they told these women something that was, first of all, physiologically wrong, but then it opened them up to the chronic disease of aging.
Wow. And you kind of witnessed all of this firsthand because you were an OB-GYN. So you had the primary patient population that this was affecting in real time.
I had the right patient, and I had the length of time to observe this. So I think what was important, though, is that, well-meaning physicians who may not have understood the intricacies of hormone therapy, and I'm trying to be nice, may have caused more damage because they relied on the FDA. And one has to look at this and say, the FDA, it was kind of the gold standard. It is the standard of care. So it's hard for me to point a finger. But again, we got caught up in a media blitz, because I remember getting a phone call the day that the WHI was terminated, asking my opinion. Well, what happened is it hadn't been vetted yet, so there was really no way of looking at all these errors. And one of the major problems with the WHI is that there was an estrogen-only study going on at the same time. That study showed a decline in breast cancer by taking estrogen only. That never came out in the press. So that was really a selective release of information by talking heads that resulted in thousands of deaths. Imagine a drug that would come out and would kill 49,000 women. I think we would have heard about that, don't you? So a lot of things here have been siphoned through a media filter, and we have caused more damage. But the FDA now has reversed that. What scares me is, what other things do they need to reverse out there? Usually you could look at the FDA as the gold standard. I'm kind of concerned about that now. But again, at least they've reversed it, but we've lost a generation of women. It's too late to start hormone therapy. After being in the menopause for 10 years or more, don't start hormone therapy, because it will not reverse these chronic changes, unfortunately.
Okay, so that is the primary question. I'm sorry, I've got to talk about the women.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you can take over for the men. So this is the question I get the most is women my age, I'm 36. So I would say 36 to 50-ish. They're asking me very frequently, help me with my hormones. Where do I start? And so you're saying it has to start then, that you can't start later.
Well, Look, when you say hormones, there are a lot of different hormones. There's
Right.
DHEA, pregnenolone, thyroid. I can go through a litany. It's you don't necessarily need estrogen until you start having estrogen deficient syndromes. But again, there are other hormones that you need to be checked. But I just say it's just not hormones only. You have to lower your inflammation. The hormones work better. That's why we're seeing this semaglutide if you're up north, semaglutide if you're in the south. You're seeing that when you lose weight and control your insulin, your hormones work better and vice versa. So there's no really age that's too early to start and looking at your hormone therapy. I doubt, though, that you would need estrogen in your reproductive years. Now, what we're seeing now is what they call premature ovarian insufficiency, okay? Meaning we're seeing now that younger women are going into menopause at least 2 to 3 years earlier than the previous generation. So these toxic environmental contaminants are now destroying ovarian function along with other, problems. And you might need, to address the hormone estrogen deficiency earlier. But again, it is a combination, not just one hormone. So I think, it has to depend on your symptoms. And again, it's an individual, assessment.
So let me make sure I heard you right. You know me, I'm very about detoxing. Like for inflammation, for autoimmune, I detox once a year with Cellcore. And that's just been the thing that's worked best for me for the last 15 years with my thyroid issues. So what I heard you say is if you work on your inflammation first, then you're more likely to have stable hormones?
You have to control your inflammation for hormones to work better.
So do you like for your patients to try the Inflammacore? I'm sorry, I said that wrong.
No, Inflammacore is fine.
The Intest Restore.
Inflammacore, Intest Restore. Yeah, Inflammacore is great. Yes, that is part of my basic protocol. And a lot of what we're saying today will appear in my little digital book, which you will talk about later.
Which we will link, yes.
But again, there is a basic protocol that I suggest all women and men to begin. And I think that's a basis then for hormonal balancing. We want to call it hormonal balancing and not necessarily replacement, okay? Mm-hmm. Because, sometimes you're making an adequate amount of hormones, but because of your toxicity, the hormones cannot function to their best, okay? So again, and I think the hormone you want to control, of course, is insulin. Remember, insulin, remember Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes, they call it now. So insulin, as you get older, you become more resistant to insulin, and that's when you start gaining weight. That's when things don't work as well. So you need to have a very strong detox protocol, but you need to have a daily detox protocol that, you can comply with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what is your recommendation for women now? Like now that we know this, and what would you say to the women who are premenopausal? We'll go through the stages. We'll go premenopausal.
Actually, it's reproductive years.
Okay.
Then you go to premenopause when that's my definition, where you start, that generally begins in midlife, and you become, the first hormone that goes down is progesterone, not estrogen. Remember that. So people always say, oh, my estrogen's dropping. Well, your progesterone dropped before that because your eggs are getting older and you don't have as many eggs. So you might start seeing in premenopause more estrogen dominance, heavier flow, shorter cycles, some weight gain. Things don't work quite like they used to. And remember, after 35, your body no longer, has a physiologic reserve to protect you. You start having to protect it. That's something to remember at 35. Remember, at 35, your fecundity or your ability to get pregnant starts to drop. So that tells you right there, the eggs are getting a little older. So you start seeing more estrogen dominance, heavier flows, shorter cycles. The perimenopause is just what it means. Peri means around. The cycles then start lengthening out. Sometimes you'll drop them for a couple of months, may have some night sweats along the way. You start having some symptoms of estrogen deficiency around the perimenopause. And then you go into the menopause. The menopause is defined as having no menstrual cycles for 1 year. So a lot of times you don't know you're in the menopause until you're postmenopausal because you've already gone through the year.
And at that point, it's too late.
No. You have 10 years.
Oh, you have 10 years.
So let's say the average age of menopause in the United States is around 51. So around 61, if you haven't started hormones, don't bother. There are other ways to decrease your inflammation, but it requires more aggressive programs. And unfortunately, at the 10-year mark, that inflammation has already set up, and there is damage that's done that may not be able to be repaired. So what you want to do in the background is always do these, detox anti-inflammatory protocols starting at 30 or whatever. Okay. So that way it just keeps getting better and better, and you don't get out of control. Because a lot of these things, unfortunately, you can't take an antibiotic or a tablet and they get better in 24 hours. They're there and they don't go away. Okay.
Blake, hearing all of this, what does it make you think of?
Yeah. Well, going back, you were talking about reducing inflammation. How much does food and our environment, like chemicals, cleaning chemicals,
Clothing.
Yeah, clothing, and especially our water too. I know that city water, they put a lot of chemicals in the water to purify it. There's a lot of chlorine, fluoride, that type of stuff. So how much of the environmental stuff, especially food, since we're ingesting that into our bodies, how much of that affects hormone balance and inflation?
I could spend a whole day talking on this. So let me just summarize this. The Endocrine Society, which I'm a member of, is a very conservative society. They did a study of over 1,000 women breast milk. Okay, because breast milk is a good place to look for contaminants, and we know breast milk. Then breast milk can cross the placenta and the fetus has, and of course you're feeding a baby. They found 100% of human breast milk has contaminants, phthalates, PCB, Newton, these EDCs, endocrine disruptors. So we're all contaminated. We got microplastics. We got it all. It's already embedded in us. Unfortunately, your generation is more toxic than my generation. So that's why we're seeing this epidemic of colon cancer below the age of 50. That's why women are going into premature ovarian insufficient earlier. So we're actually in a sea of toxins. The air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink, and the clothes we wear. Even when you lay on a pillow, you're getting microplastics. So what you got to do is understand they're already embedded. So what you must do now is avoid increasing your toxic load. You avoid those things that you can identify. Food's very important because it's how is the food processed, ultra processed, what's the source. You want to make sure that the food you eat, you don't react to allergic wise, but then again, make sure you're not adding to your toxic load. The same with everything else. But that's why you do a ongoing detox. And it doesn't mean where you have to eat, lettuce for 40 days and 40 nights. It means that you have things that help your liver detox, and help excrete the toxins that are there. So I think that that's a great question. And that's what, as we go on with these podcasts, we'll discuss details and ways to go about that. But I think anytime we talk about hormones, you have to be at your lowest level of toxicity to really appreciate their benefits.
Yeah, I think, you see a lot of people go overboard with trying to control the toxins, right? They'd be like, I'm not going to use this certain type of candle, or, and it can go overboard on it. But I'm sure that there is, certain things that you can do that moves the needle quite a bit. Me personally, just off my gut instincts, would be food and water is probably the two biggest areas that you can make an impact in that area. But it's very clear, right? Whenever you pick up a product at the store, or whatever, and you're reading the ingredients on there, you can't pronounce half of them. And it's like, to me, it's like, that makes sense. Like, that's got to be affecting your hormones too.
Right.
Since you said about food, I probably need to present some of my old slides. I used to have a slide, and I had a specific type of food that had vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin C. It had a very healthy protein. And then I had another food that had various food dye color in it. It had these other preservatives. And so I put up one food, and everybody chose the food on the left, the one that had vitamin C, vitamin B, vitamin D. That was Alpo dog food. Then the other one was, and I'm sorry, pepperoni slices that you buy at the store. So you had Alpo, and the crowd went wild. I mean, and this was a group of ladies who said, well, I guess we need to start shopping for dog food. So that just shows you, the hidden things. Now, when you chew gum, there are microplastics in gum that you don't know about. I mean, these things are hidden. And again, we've been a little slow, like this red food dye color. And that should have been, removed like years ago. Okay. So again, you want to do something you can comply with. If you can't comply with it, it's not worth doing. You can't do this for 3 to 6 months and stop. This has to be an ongoing, regimen. And that's why the one I've worked out, again, because I've been in a place for a long period of time. I kind of know what people can comply with because I have to do it myself at my age. So you're right. That's very insightful.
Good. And myself personally, what I've started to do is try to get back to basic foods the way that God created them. So venison, grass-fed beef that's, no hormones, no antibiotics, just natural, pasture-raised. I tried to stay away from a lot of produce because I feel like as much stuff as they're sprayed with, and my dad grew up, raising peaches and stuff, and he would tell me all the stuff that he sprayed on them, back in the 70s, 80s. So, I try to stick with a lot of meats, a heavy meat diet as natural as possible. And with our water, we've been distilling it, trying to just remove it. And it's crazy. We have a 1 gallon distiller, and when we boil off all that water, there's soot left at the bottom from our city water, which is just mind blowing to me that much stuff was in that amount of water. And I know that I've talked with Kaylee about supplementing what the minerals that you lose from there.
Yes.
But, is that a good approach? And is there anything that you would add to that?
On the water, be sure that let's watch out for reverse osmosis water because it actually takes out everything and you'll become electrolyte depleted. I see that quite often. I can look at a patient's electrolytes and they'll have a low sodium or low chloride. And I'll say, do you drink a lot of RO water? And they say, oh yeah, all the time. So if you do that, add a pack of electrolytes back into that. I'm glad you mentioned that. Now, in diets, when you type in to one of these search engines, the proper diet, you come up with like 2 million references. There's a diet that fits everybody's needs. In your case, that's a great diet. You have to watch too much red meat because of the cancer. And I think that's mainly because of where it comes from in the feedlots, the corn-fed beef, okay, rather than the natural. So I think that depending on your genetic makeup depends on what you eat. So you kind of are a carnivore type person, okay? Others may want to be more of a Mediterranean. So I think it fits everybody's individual needs. But the important thing, like you said, is that the food has the least contaminants possible, okay? And I think that's where you should aim for. So, yeah, but that's part of, deciding what diet you should be on is kind of what people like me help you find out, okay? But I think a lot of times, basically when I tell somebody, anytime you eat something and you feel tired within an hour or two afterwards, you made the wrong choice. You'll turn into a winterized polar bear. And I know what a winterized polar bear looks like. Okay?
You did. You just got. Tell them where you just got back
from Churchill, Canada, where I photographed polar bears. So I was looking and said, "Boy, I was right. They do look like some patients who ate the wrong food." But their genetic makeup, it's beneficial to them. We're not winterized polar bears, so it's not good for us to have a big midsection. And men, I call it a tortoise shell. Okay, so no, but you're right on. And I think that when is the time you start doing that? Well, right now, if you get colon cancer at 40, it started growing when you were 30. And you should have been eating right at 20. So when's the right time? Don't wait till you're in menopause and you're 50. Start today. And I think this podcast, as we go on with various sessions, will help you make the right choices.
Yeah, I think I bring that up because I want to try to give any of our listeners like tangible, simple steps to take, just from listening to the podcast specifically. And there's obviously more detailed stuff that they can do by going to see a physician. But I want to just give people as much information they can do on their own. As,
in the future, the future, we're going to make a PDF of his tips for supporting your hormones because a lot of them are supplement based.
Perfect.
Which is accessible to most all people. And then, you're right. Like the food, air, water changes, those are helpful.
I would say this, a good plant-based diet with plenty of deep green leafy fruits, vegetables, a very good protein source, be it legumes, meat, whatever, and just a balanced diet that's not extreme. A lot of times you can get guidance on what to eat by looking at a glycemic index. The glycemic index generally measures your response, your insulin response, and any foods that are less than 80 generally are going to be safe. That is the cruciferous vegetables, various proteins. Cherries are 40. I don't know who designed the cherry, but it's got a glycemic index of 40. An Idaho potato is above 80. A red potato is below 80. So it doesn't mean you can't eat anything above 80, but that should be less than 20% of the time, and 80% of the time, it should be below 80. But that's just a nice way of looking at what would upset your insulin. And in the long run, it's what balances your insulin that's the most important, in my opinion, as well as avoiding the toxins, okay? So you have allergies, food allergies, which you can define by a test. I can tell you anything you crave, you're probably allergic to. So, so much for that.
Why
okay?
is that?
Because you eat it all the time. And the more you eat something, the higher incidence you have of food allergy. I mean, the older you get, the more food allergies you get. So a basic tenet, which I was taught and which I've seen the majority of times, if you crave something, you probably have antibodies against it. So you want to rotate your food every 4 days, 3 to 4 days. But be aware of your food allergies. If you notice reactions, generally, wheat. I always say, no wheats, no sweets, hoping that you will do at least 60 to 70% of what I ask. It's sometimes not that easy, but glycemic index less than 80. Make sure you know what your allergies are if you still have symptoms. And, generally a balanced meal. Again, understanding where the food originates from. And then you integrate kind of our basic, detox, or what I call matrix stabilization protocol, and then assess your hormones. And you've really done, the majority of stuff you need to do, but you have to do it day in, day out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we're here to help people negotiate. Okay.
Well, and that's kind of where my mind kept going, of course, is to the spiritual, mental component of all of this, because we can throw facts at everyone all day long, but if they don't have the motivation to do these things, then it's not going to be a possible implementation into their daily lives.
Prevention is the hardest thing to sell. Now, my cancer survivors are some of the healthiest people I've ever seen because they have a reason to follow the protocols. But, trying to sell prevention, you almost have to say it, scare people into it because it just doesn't have a ring to it. Sometimes you don't see the good that you're doing or feel it. But when you come down with the actual disease, if you have a chance to survive that disease initially, then you're on board with these things.
I feel like that's very similar. You know me, I'm always thinking back to the scriptures. And I mean, it pretty much plainly says that most of the things we don't come to the realization until we're suffering.
Unfortunately, that's human nature. And that's why we're here today is, when these people come in to see me on maybe, and I see people every 6 months.
That's what I wanted to ask you is how often do y'all run the hormone panels?
Well, it depends on what hormone you're on. By law, I have to check your testosterone every 6 months, and we're not going to go into the lunacy of that. But anyway, it depends. I tend to see patients, if we just start on hormones, maybe sooner than that. But I tell them a lot of times, this is don't give up. I'm the cheerleader here. This is why you're doing it. And it's kind of a reminder. So I generally see people at least twice a year. Sometimes every 4 months, depending on what they're on. But again, it's just to remind them, don't forget to do this, okay? And we always have a good laugh on that because sometimes you can, veer off the track and I have to welcome you back into the fold, okay?
But yeah, and I want to speak on that as well. And not to detract, I want to stay on the topic of women's hormones, but myself personally and my experience with my testosterone collapsing in my 20s, something I was not aware of, not paying attention to at all. And it took me 8 years to figure that out because it's that analogy of the frog in a boiling pot of water, right? Like as this temperature slowly increases, you don't realize you're in danger until you're dead, right? And so that's kind of my experience where I wasn't paying attention to it. I'm like, I'm 20, I'm in my 20s, it's not going to be an issue. And it happens so gradually, you don't realize that you're in danger until everything is just falling apart around you. And so I think that's, what you're saying is get tested often, even if you think you're young enough. I think it's good to track it at least just to keep an idea on what the rate changes and, just be aware of what your internal health is like, because it can change quite a bit before you actually feel anything, in my experience.
What you said is so important for us to understand is you're never too young to at least have a hormonal assessment. And I must say, and we're talking about the days of gender-specific medicine, the poor male population has been ignored on hormones. It's just not a manly thing to talk to your barber or whomever about your hormones. Whereas, for the other gender, hormones are discussed all the time. And men's hormones now are declining even more rapidly than in women's, and it's from the environment. And you have to remember the word menopause is M-E-N, men-o-pause, okay? I happened to be a freshman in college when All in the Family came out. And Archie Bunker, I didn't realize in 40 years I could have been an Archie Bunker, okay? But he is the perfect example of a male menopause, okay? So, but, it slowly develops. At the age of 50, you lose approximately 50% of your testosterone, they say. So, but I see it now earlier. I've seen sperm counts in men. I was taught 50 million was normal. Now it's 20 million. So what's going to happen is these endocrine disruptors affect the male much more drastically than the female. And we don't know enough about, spermatogenesis to counteract this. So I think, if I was projecting, I think we'll become extinct as a population over a period of centuries if these toxins continue to have their current effect. But you're right. I have tested testosterone in these younger men, and they are drastically lower than men of my generation. But you don't notice it, and it's not a topic that you bring up with the coach at the football or anything. So
right.
you're kind of suffering in silence because that's just how it is. So again, I tell all men that they need a good male gynecologist to steer them through this. So,
yeah, I mean, the symptoms, right, is just like, starting to be more negative in thoughts and stuff like that, starting to be more tired. And so I would attribute that to like, well, maybe it's a work thing. Maybe it's a change in family stuff, right? Getting married, having kids, right? Maybe those are the culprits of it, when really, in reality, it was really the hormones going in the background. And I think, there's a certain element of, we're not educated on this at all. And I'm not in the medical field. And so I didn't hear a word about this until I started having issues and started digging into it and researching it for myself. So, that problem of there's just no education on it. And I'd be kind of curious at a foundational level, what do the hormones do in the function of the body?
Oh, so testosterone, sense of well-being, energy, abstract thought, libido, muscle tone. And for men, I tell them, and this is not being chauvinistic, and women told me about this, men have an empty file. And that empty file from higher levels of testosterone is a man could look at a woman and just see her mouth moving and not hear a word she says. We have the ability to tune out, things, whereas women are very smart. They're biologically better designed than we are. They can think in terms of spider webs. We think in terms of a straight line. So the testosterone at higher levels gives us that ability to create a, environment where we just can ignore it. And and that's not a bad thing to do in this stressful society. But you have to look at testosterone is it helps motivate a man. In fact, after the age of 50, there's a much higher suicidal rate for men than before 50, and that's we think is linked to lower testosterone. But it helps abstract thought, and again, it's the motivation. Again, men start feeling more shoulder pain. The muscles don't work as well. And remember, the heart has, I think, more testosterone receptors than any other organ in your body. So it is very helpful for that. So there are a lot of things testosterone. Now, and this may be hard for somebody, a cowboy, to understand, but testosterone converts into estrogen in the brain, and that's why there's a lot lower incidence of Alzheimer's, in my opinion, in men than women. So it is a wonderful hormone. We're starting to see the benefits of that. And, the treatment for male menopause is coming out of the closet. I remember as I was talking to these women with their menopausal symptoms, I thought it was contagious because I started having the same symptoms because I was at their same age. And I'm thinking, my gosh, I had those problems too. Maybe not the hot flashes, but as it turns out, it was because of, declining hormones. I think I run similar panels on men that I do on women. And men's estrogen, as we get older, goes up. So it's interesting how our testosterone drops, but a lot of times our estrogen goes up, and that's not a good thing. Now, you need some estrogen, but it can be detrimental. So I think it's important to do both of the sexes, and I don't think it's ever too early to start, especially with our younger generation having a much lower hormonal levels than before, and that's because of the endocrine disruptor chemicals.
Is it safe to say that like hormones are essentially like the brain of the body? It controls the mental function, the muscle function, even mood. To me, it seems like it controls just about every aspect of our body.
So the hormones are the messengers.
Okay.
The hypothalamic pituitary system is the CPU. Okay. And it's controlled by the higher centers. The hypopituitary system controls the adrenals, the thyroid, the testicles, all the endocrine glands, essentially. And the messengers are the hormones that then go to the cells. And then, as you said, that's the effect you're seeing. So you have a messenger system. And if the messengers decline, then you don't get the signal out. Okay. And it's all mediated centrally. So whenever you say you have adrenal fatigue, it's not your adrenals. It's a hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction, which is a big mouthful to say. Just say adrenal fatigue. So I think that's important. But the hormones would be the messengers.
Okay. And the other thought that came to mind was my basic understanding when I first got into this was men just have testosterone, right? Like that's the only one that we kind of focus on. And so diving into it, you kind of learn, well, you also have estrogen. You need to balance that. And you also have all these other hormones as well, which are equally as important, just not as dominant. And then when my wife started diving into her hormones, it seems that the women's hormone panel is a lot more complex. There's a lot more factors going on in there. What comments do you have on the?
First of all, testosterone is a pro-hormone. It is not the active hormone. Testosterone can be aromatized into estradiol or the stronger dihydrotestosterone. So if your estrogen is going up in a male, that means you're turning your testosterone into a female-like hormone, and you're not getting the dihydrotestosterone you need. So fat cells tend to do this. You do need some estrogen, but you need to control your estrogen. That's why you should have an estradiol drawn also. Now there's DHEA, which is it's a master hormone. It has so many different effects, but it is kind of the reservoir hormone for testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, things like that. Then you have your thyroid hormone. That's very important. Pregnenolone is the first hormone that goes to DHEA, and then DHEA is broken down into the other hormones. So there's a complex milieu. I ordered really the same hormonal panel on a male that I would be a female. We don't make progesterone, unfortunately, high enough. And progesterone protects from Parkinson's. If you notice, the majority of Parkinson's are in males. And progesterone, we might make a small amount from the adrenals, but I think the only difference is I don't measure progesterone in a male. But again, these are, there's an overlap. The amounts are going to be different, but the balance for each sex is the important thing. But the underlying thing is to have low chronic inflammation, or it doesn't matter what you take.
Yeah.
I think right now, like for women, the test that everyone always asks about is, do I need a Dutch test?
So the Dutch test is an interesting. It uses dried urine. It doesn't measure FSH or LH. And that determines simply stated, the age of your ovaries. It measures the byproducts, generally, of hormones, whereas you want to know the symptoms are generally related to the hormones that you absorb. So estradiol does break down into different metabolites like the catecholesterins, but it is the level of estradiol in your bloodstream that's equated with your symptoms.
Do you think that every woman needs that test, or do you think that doing the basic panel more frequently is more efficient because our hormones change so much?
So let me put it this way. I used to do in vitro fertilization. I was a director of an IVF lab. I was able to do a surrogate uterus, whether this woman had no ovaries. I was able to give her hormones, prime her uterus for the implantation of an embryo using only the serum test, and we had successful pregnancy. You could not do that with saliva or a Dutch test. Okay. So, the Dutch test is generally not covered by insurance. It runs $299 or what. And that's kind of an expensive test, okay, to do.
I feel like I have several friends who have been talked into doing it, and then they don't actually have someone interpret it well to them.
That's the problem. You have to interpret it. You're looking at byproducts. And I think the Dutch test does work well for certain symptoms that do not respond to therapy. I think it's important when you look at the adrenal function that it needs to be the Dutch test would help there, but a saliva test is excellent for adrenal functions. And even the Endocrine Society now has okayed that. So I think the Dutch test has a place to be used, but it's not my primary one I go to. Okay, it's one that I would use secondary. And the serum test are generally going to be covered by insurance, and you can do those repetitively. But they're the ones that are most equated to the symptoms that you're having. I can use either one, and depends on what the patient desire is. But interpretation is the key on that.
Mm-hmm. What do you say to this trend where all of these female OB-GYNs are saying that men don't really have a leg to stand on regarding hormones? And you're smiling because
I thought that argument was over in the 1990s. This woman to woman thing. Okay. I see it's resurfaced. First of all, I know there's some frustration. In medical school, and in my residency, I was never taught that testosterone was important to women. I'm not sure now that we see an improved education as far as insomnia, foggy memory, whatever. Look, at my age, I got the same symptoms. I may not have a hot flash, but you're talking to, I'm in the trenches with my patients. The average age of my patients are in the early to mid 60s. I'm there, I'm battling the same things they do. And I must point out that my friend, Dr. Uzi Rice, wrote a book in the early 2000s that defined everything we do today. And he's not female, obviously. So I have to say, we don't want to have a gender-based discrimination, but I think it's more important you go to the physician that listens to your problems. Sir William Osler was probably one of the greatest clinicians I know of. And he said something that, you don't really hear much today. Listen to the patient. If you listen to the patient, they'll tell you what's wrong with them. And if you listen to them long enough, they'll help decide what treatment. So I think the key to whoever you go to is that they listen to what you say, and then they have enough clinical expertise to address those issues. And the issues that we see today, are just not estrogen mediated. Yes, hot flashes are one of the prime, symptoms that a woman will come to me with, especially in her late 40s, early 50s. It's interesting on that WHI study, they excluded women who had moderate to severe hot flashes. So the patients that I see, they didn't even look at. The reason why they excluded these women is they knew that these women would drop out of their control group and they would not have statistical significance. So they excluded those women who had significant hot flashes. How that study ever got published or vetted to me is still a mystery. But back to your question, what you want to know is somebody who's willing to listen to your individual patient experiences. I always listen to a patient and say, well, they'll say, well, I'm very sensitive to medications and, or that supplement didn't work. Then I'll ask, well, what has worked for you in the past? Now, this takes more than 15 minutes. You'll see the insurance mediated thing is a 15-minute or less visit. It can't be a conveyor belt. So when I learned medicine, it was said that medicine is 50% art, 50% science. Okay. That's an important thing to remember. So I would look at the clinical expertise, the length of time they're in practice, and not just segue to a gender because, I would find it hard as a woman to go to somebody who's 30 or 40 and they understand what I'm experiencing at 70.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at, their ability and their clinical expertise and not their sex. But I said, when I heard that, I'm thinking, I thought we had that in the 90s, and I said, my word, does that come back again? What marketing ploy would this be? But again, there is frustration, but I think, we don't want to perpetuate a gender-based discrimination in a professional setting. And again, the end thing is, do you get the results you want? And a lot of times, what I'm directing my practice now is prevention. 1 in 2 people are going to get cancer. I can tell you now, I don't care what they say about modern medicine. We do not have, very good treatments for metastatic cancer, especially distant metastatic cancer. You look at pancreatic cancer, glioblastomas. I mean, it's very dismal. So I think, you need to be proactive and not reactive. I think that's very important. But you need to go to somebody who has empathy and clinical expertise and allows you to verbalize your concerns. And that really goes a long way. So I hope that helps.
Yes, you're very good at that.
Yeah, I think it's really important about the empathy part of it. just from my experience, the first doctor I went to, endocrinologist, didn't really ask me any questions. He just ran a test. Is like, oh, you're low, do this. And, probably telling on myself here a little bit, but he'd give me a certain dosage. And for me at my size, being 6'8", at the time I was 320 pounds.
You have improved then.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And, so it, I was taking the dosage that he was recommending and nothing was really happening. And I've always had to just take a little more than the normal dosage to get the results. So I just started to slowly increase it myself in it. And then I started to see change, and I got myself up to like about 700. I had tested myself. I didn't share that with him. And I was like, I feel much better, but I still feel like I'm missing something. And I pushed myself up to 1,000 and I felt whole and complete. And when I went back to him and he saw my levels were at 1,000, he was upset with me for going that high. And he said, we want to keep you around the 300 to 500 range. And I'm like, listen, I was like, I was at that range and I still felt awful. And so for me, I think it's important, when you're looking at somebody to walk through your hormone journey, that you find a doctor who asks you questions about how you feel and not just necessarily base it on the numbers. And that empathy, I think, is extremely important to really get to know how you're feeling and what your experience is and to kind of walk through you in that journey.
I want everybody that's listening to this podcast to know I did not coach him on what to say. This is like, please don't make it so easy for me. Okay. I mean, that's like you handed me this golden opportunity to say that's exactly the problem. And you have a blood test, we get so infatuated on these tests, and I see these functional medicine gurus out there, offering these, multi-test things. Look,
for thousands of dollars.
Look, you can drop a lot of money, but these are simple numbers that change periodically. And really, they're kind of a guideline, but they're not something that you always have to have. And I think, we were so segued into looking at the cell as the basic unit of disease. As we go on in this podcast, I have a different way of looking at things that has nothing to do just with the cell itself. It is the extracellular matrix. So blood tests to me may guide us, but it's your symptoms that certainly should be integrated. And 1,000 to me on the testosterone at your age would be, appropriate if you feel good. Okay. And I think that it's individual. Everybody has a different set point, and you have to take that into consideration, but don't become, so restricted by a lab. Now, there are certain labs such as your thyroid that you have to watch. But then there are other labs that give you a little more leeway. Upper normal is not bad, okay? Remember, medicine is predicated on disease. They have a range on a lab. If you fall out of that range, you have a disease. Nobody went out in the waiting room and said, how do you feel at low normal versus upper mid normal? That does not happen in a traditional medicine setting. In a functional medicine setting, or in my setting, it's how you do feel. You might be upper or mid-upper normal, and you're going to feel, in my opinion, somewhat better than at a low normal, okay? But then again, that's on an individual basis.
I think with anything, so I'm going to do what I do, which is squirrel for 1 second, but it'll circle back. So I have been studying Israel because I got into Hebrews 8, and it said the old covenant is obsolete as it is vanishing away. So I go on this deep dive of all of these theories, these different, I didn't realize there's so many different theories on end times and like what will happen with Israel and like what's going to go on. Like I've only been taught one way. And what that's kind of led me to see is that in anything, whether it's theology, medicine, why do we all just feel the need to control the information? So like, everyone is so about like, oh, this is exactly the way it is supposed to be. It's black and white, when we know that it's not. We know that there are mysteries. We know that we could never know all of it. And like you said, it's patient to patient. It's how that patient feels. It's spiritual, mental, emotional, physical. That's different for each person. And so there's not like a perfect way that we could give it to every single patient.
That's true. And unfortunately, our current system, FDA media, is a one size fits all. We're getting better. Now, just because it's not FDA approved doesn't mean it's dangerous. It doesn't work. It just means that somebody didn't cough up $250 million to send that molecule through. Okay. So what we want to do is, in my practice, it's observation-based clinical outcome. If it works, I do it. Okay. It has to have some, evidence base to it. I will say I have done energy medicine, which we talked about before. It's part of my armamentarium that I include. But again, I had the advantage of being in practice for an extended period of time. And I just saw a lady last week. I delivered her son 45 years ago. I mean, that's a long time to follow somebody. I was shocked that, I said, my gosh, I didn't realize it was that long ago, but she stayed with me. But you can see these changes, and you then find out, like you said, it's individualized. Her needs are different from the next patient. But if you only have 15 minutes or 7 minutes to see this person, you may not always be able to pick that up. So you have to remember there is the acute medicine approach, and then there is the functional medicine approach, which as we age, you start to have to incorporate. So I agree with you 100%. I think, and we haven't gotten into stress. That's for another podcast. But I think spiritual satisfaction is very important. And when I say spiritual satisfaction, I just say a particular religion at all. But I do think that's a major component. One thing I wanted to share with you, and this is quite important, I think. I am a wildlife photographer, and I do go to these various countries. I just returned from Rwanda and Uganda to photograph the gorillas. And so I sat down with a gorilla doctor who's a gorilla vet, and I always, ask certain questions about the health of these animals. Remember, a gorilla shares about 98.4% of its genetics with human. So I asked him, and he knew what I did. I asked him, I said, well, what does the alpha male gorilla die from? I mean, I'm thinking they can live 50 years, up to 50, 55 years in the wild. And I expected something like heart disease or, something that would hit us, cancer. And they autopsy now any of the dead gorillas because there are only about 1,100 left in the world. There were 248 when Diana Fossey started her campaign to save them. And what he told me shocked me. The silverback alpha male gorilla most often dies from stress and loneliness. Not one of the things that I thought. And what happens is one of these younger gorillas, male gorillas, as they get older, it gets a little stronger. They push the old alpha male off to the side. He's ostracized from the gorilla family, which generally is 10 to 13 gorillas. And he stresses out because he's no longer a member of anything. He's irrelevant. And, for somebody like me, it's like put me out of the old horse to the glue factory. When you don't become relevant or you become stressed, stress can kill you. I mean, it does it for the alphabet. So we need to take a lesson from the animal kingdom that the stress that we're undergoing, and it is overwhelming, overdone. That is a killer. So, that's part of this hormonal balancing things that we'll get into. But I thought that might be something that, is a little wake up call. If it can kill an 800-pound silverback, trust me, and their genetics and ours are very similar. So, that's something to think about.
Yeah. And I want to, further back that up with my own personal experience, and trying to figure out how did my testosterone crash. The blaring factor was stress.
Yes.
At the moment that I started seeing myself put on weight, there were multiple high stress factors that I feel like shifted something internally. And, I'm a big believer in stress being a much bigger factor than we give it credit for. And unfortunately, the way our world is set up and our culture and stuff is it just feeds more stress into your life. Right. So
you're right. I was writing a book called The Overdone Woman Syndrome before COVID. Thankfully, I waited till after COVID because I found out that the overdone woman syndrome, where you have a woman who is trying to juggle job, family life, and she's overdone, overwhelmed, overmarketed to, it's just as bad to go from 100 to 0 miles an hour because during COVID, when everything stopped, that stress reoccurred after a while because they went from, a high speed to low speed, and that created stress. So an overdone woman syndrome can become, just as bad when there's nothing to do, and they're in isolation quarantine. But what happens is the hypothalamic pituitary testicular axis, that is just like the adrenal axis, and stress will affect that axis. So you don't send the proper signaling down to the testicles and your testosterone drops. Okay. So all this works together. It is a, well-oiled machine, and then you start throwing stress in, and that's a monkey wrench in the gears. But these are all correctable. And again, everybody has a different protocol. Okay. For you, there would be a protocol that generally, you see for most, but you may have little changes that need to be required according to your allergies, sensitivities, and how you respond. You never know, about a protocol until you begin it. And then you have to change it according to your outcome and your symptoms.
Well, and that's what I love about what we do here at the FEM Center and Nurse for That, because we literally can do it all. We can do the allergy testing, the hormone analysis. We can talk to you when you're sick. We can talk to you when you're sad. We have all those references for, what someone needs for all of those instead of having to be referred.
And the other thing that I want to make a point about is I'm not saying don't use pharmaceutical medication. I'm on pharmaceutical medication. My practice is I use the best of both. I don't exclusively use one or the other. I use a combination, but there are some excellent medications, and I find that if you use them with, say, our matrix stabilization detox protocol, they work even better. So I always, look at these practices where, no, they said we only use FDA-approved drugs, or I don't use any drugs at all. I think that's going to be a problem in the long run, and that's something that can be discussed later. I think it's a combination of both. It's knowing how to use the medications in conjunction with what, you do at Nurse for That, what we do here. But again, I would not limit myself and say, no, I'm not going to use that. I'm only going to use this. It's a combination. And I do think the FDA has some very good points. They do, have some good medications, but these medications should not be used alone sometimes. And most FDA-approved drugs block a biologic pathway. And that pathway is there for a reason. And if you block that pathway for, say, 3 to 5 years, that's when you start seeing these very bad side effects that you see on TV, okay? Black box warnings. So it's not that you should use them for 3 to 5 years. It's that you should use other things around that, hoping that you can either decrease the dose or eliminate the medication. But for blood pressure or cholesterol issues, there are other things that you can combine with the medications, but I would not say do not exclude medications. I think that's the art of medicine. That's where I would come in. Again, my age really helps on this because I'm facing the same chronic inflammatory disease, parameters that my patients have.
Yeah, I think it's important. I've just seeing this more and more the older that I get is the importance of balance, right?
Yes.
You don't want to go full, only working with pharmaceutical, drugs and that type of stuff, but you also have to have a balanced lifestyle with the functional medicine.
Yes.
Everything is just such a balance, right? And you can't just have one without the other. It's a mix of the two. And like you said too, everybody's so different. I mean, I've just seen that my whole life, being my size, right? It's just, everything's different for me, right? I don't fit in an airplane. There's just different things,
right,
that are different for everybody. And I think it's even more so in health because, if you start getting into your background, your childhood, what makes you think a certain way, your temperament, your environment, there's all these factors that just have to make medicine super complicated. Which is why, I have the sympathy for medical professionals, right? It's like you've got a very complex box to open up with each individual, and it's always different, right? So it's really hard to have consistencies from person to person. But I think it's important for everybody to just, they have to be responsible for their own health and understanding the individual unique aspects of what makes them tick, what their issues are, and kind of take that upon themselves and not just rely on the physicians to direct them and tell them where to go. But just to have balance of all of that.
I'm very fortunate. My patient population that is involved with me is very interested in their health. It doesn't matter what I order on you or what I tell you to do. If you don't do it, there's no need to come see me. Okay. But these patients are very proactive. In fact, their women are always appraised of what's on the latest internet. And that's unfortunately why I have to watch the news is to see what the latest medical announcements were because they're on top of it. They are very proactive. I love men, obviously, but men generally come in and don't know anything. In fact, the man generally comes in with his wife, has given him a list of questions for me to answer. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm always amazed. A woman knows down to the exact pound what she wants to weigh, and it's generally pre-pregnant. A man doesn't know within 10 to 20 pounds of what he should weigh. So that's why married men live longer than single men, just to let you guys know out there. But you're right. It is a compliance at the end of the day. You see, I tell you, every man needs a good male gynecologist. Okay?
They really do. Everyone needs Dr. McWherter. And I'm excited because we're going to be, you have already 4 or 5. No, how many nurse practitioners do you have under you?
5.
5. And then we're about to train another one, which will be exciting, to make it more accessible. And that's one thing I did want to touch on before we end is the financial component to all of this. So, that's a barrier for a lot of people getting the help they need is the finances and then it not being covered by insurance. So I wanted to share, Chase and I recently switched to Samaritan Health Share. So we pay $350 a month for our family of 5 for insurance. And it is deductible based, like per incident. So it's not a yearly deductible. It's like a deductible per incident. And we have saved so much money doing that with Samaritan Healthcare Ministries. And so it's been great because a lot of the money that I was using on all the cash pay stuff, like all the therapies I like to do, I'm able to funnel that money toward that kind of medicine that I want to receive instead of just giving it to an insurance company. Now, I know a lot of people have insurance. They've put a lot of investment into it. So it's nice when they can use their insurance and that it is covered. But what would you say to people who feel like the finances are a barrier to getting the help that they need? Like, do you think that what we're doing can help them as well?
I'm kind of one of the dinosaurs out there. I'm a single practitioner and I still take insurance.
You do?
Yeah. So the insurance, still covers, I'm not a cash only basis. And so I do take insurance. Now, unfortunately, we can't take Medicare because Medicare, as of, maybe with this new announcement, but Medicare doesn't cover hormones very well. They certainly don't cover compounded hormones. But I do take insurance. And again, it's important not to get sick. I tell my patients, my job is to keep you out of the hospital. Okay. You want to run up a bill? Go in the hospital. Okay. So I say, really what we're doing is trying to keep you out of the hospital. I'm trying to keep you from getting sick. As we age, there's always going to be something coming up, but let's minimize that. So, it's kind of an insurance policy there to stay well. What a novel concept is not to get sick. So there's a lot of, if you stabilize things up front, balance things up front, your chances of, having to have one of these huge bills is certainly diminished. But again, yeah, I take insurance yet. So not that there are a lot of things you can say about insurance. I still take it. And it's called shared responsibility, I guess.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah. And I think to add to that, yeah, I've been cash paid this whole process.
Right. You don't have anything, right?
Yeah,
You're doing it yourself.
I'm just doing cash pay. I mean, the insurance was so much for the premiums.
It is.
And stuff that I was like, you know what, if I just saved all that money and just paid for the items when I need them, it's actually saved me a ton of money going that right. Now, granted, if there's a major thing, right, that's where you kind of have an issue. But as far as, paying to get the hormone tests done and get healthy from that sense, it's actually a lot more affordable than I think people think. Generally, anytime that you go and interact with a physician or a hospital, whatever, you're like shocked by the price. A lot of times the pricing is super low for cash pay on a lot of this type of stuff. And it is affordable.
You're right. Now, I do in my digitalized book that's going to be pretty soon posted. Unfortunately, the insurance system is broken now. We know that. Okay. I doubt if it's going to be changed in my lifetime. But, the problem is right now in the United States, I think we're ranked either 52nd or 58th in the world as far as longevity. That's pathetic. Okay. And, you just heard this most recent, announcement where the drug companies have, are supposed to agree to drop these like Mounjaro or Ozempic, which was $1,100, $1,200 down to $150. I use compounded. Somebody looked at $150. That's a huge price markup. So we have a system that's broken. I pay astronomical premiums. You say, well, you're a doctor. You get it. No, they charge me more, I think, because I'm a doctor. Okay.
Mhm.
So the premiums are outlandish. I don't see how people afford it. But we're not the healthiest nation in the world. I mean, that's pathetic. We're almost down into a third world category. So it's a system that's broken. So you have to take, charge of your own health. Don't always expect insurance to pay for everything. And remember, there's no cash for clunkers here. I mean, you have one body and that's all you have, and you better take care of it. So I know you go out to a movie, eat a meal, it's several $100s. Well, yeah, don't freak out, if you have to take some supplements, and that could prolong your life. Prioritize things. What's important? Your health. And I think the insurance, I'm afraid it won't be rectified in my lifetime. I wish it would be, but again, that's what we're dealing with. So, we have to then adjust to, the economic reality.
Yeah. The investment that you're making in yourself, right? You're talking about longevity, just living a long life. But if it's a long life and you're not happy and healthy and thriving in that, there's no sense in having a long life there. And my personal experience, when my testosterone was low, I wasn't suicidal, but I would definitely have been happy if I had died in a car accident or just escaped, all that stuff. And when I got on testosterone, got my hormones fixed, and my physical, body changed quite a bit, and people would go like, "Whoa, what happened? What'd you do?" And people saw the physical change, and I always tell them the mental change was 10 times what you see on the physical side. It's unreal. Yeah. The positive outlook, the determination, the patience I have, the mood, the optimistic mentality. I mean, all that was just such a drastic change. And, before I got my testosterone fix, I legitimately was like, I do not see myself living past 40. That's not an exaggeration. I'm like, I could not fathom at the trajectory I was going. I'm like, I can't envision life past 40. And now it's like, yeah, I'll be 80, 90, no problem. Right. It's crazy how much that the hormone levels, and it's like I could function barely, but that's certainly no way to live. And the amount that I paid, I would gladly pay 5 times that, 10 times that for knowing what I got out of it.
So you want your lifespan to be a rectangle where it's not how long you live, it's how healthy you are when you're living. And you don't want to have it to be a declining slope. So you want to be, full of energy. You want to have good mental acuity, spiritually satisfied, happy life. And then when we change from this energy form into another energy form, you want it to be rather sudden. You don't want to be suffering. You don't want to become a burden to your family. Men especially. Men, they do not do well when they start to be losing their mobility and get hospital because that doesn't go well. So you don't want a downward slope. You want to be functioning the best you can, the optimum, and then when it happens, it's sudden. That's kind of the goal. But we don't want to make that rectangle too short. We want to prolong the rectangle as long as possible. But that's a good point you made. And again, if there was another way to do it, I would do it. But I've had plenty of time to look and see what's the best way. And I'm telling you, this works. Okay. It's just compliance. That's the only thing I can't, provide. But I think motivation is part of what we do. Okay. And it does work.
Awesome. Do you have any other questions? It feels like we're kind of wrapping up on this topic, but I certainly see multiple areas that we could go much deeper on several of these other topics.
Oh, so many areas. And how many chapters are in your book?
Right now, 23. So, 50 years, you accumulate a lot of, experience and information. So I'm trying to hold it to 23. But they do provide insights in what we talk about. It'll be a nice reference. And again, I put this in digitalized form because things change so rapidly. Like had I put this into a paper bound, well, this announcement at the FDA, I wouldn't be able to, put it into a digitalized form. I'd have to, and that's just, so medicine is changing so rapidly. Yes, quote, AI is the new term out there. And AI does have some promise, but it still does not place your clinical acumen and the ability to listen to a patient. Okay. And then come up your intuition and your expertise on top of that. So, thanks for having me today.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we didn't ask you that you wish we did?
I'm going to save it for the next one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Sounds
I
good.
think based on everything that we talked about, just as we leave everybody, what are some actionable steps people can take to start to dive into their hormone journey, and what they should be looking for if they're going to go see a physician? Just some actionable steps.
So what I would do, and maybe we can post my basic protocol or recommendations. I would think, first of all, to see, the physician who understands what we've been talking about, and to jot down what your symptoms are, what your goals are. It's very important to know your family history. Let me say that again. It's very important to know your family history. We can go on that in later podcast. And then when you go to the physician, find one that will listen to you. And then, it's always wonderful when they tell me what their problems are and what their expectations are and what their past experiences have been, what they didn't react to, if they're sensitive to medication, yada, yada, yada. So then they can run an assessment on their hormones, but there are other things to look at too. And that way, just, get into the loop is to find out if there's something broken, what we can do to fix it, but then outline a long-term plan for prevention, which for me, in a lot of cases, will prevent you from acquiring other symptoms. As you get older, the symptoms increase, let me tell you, okay? So again, it's never too early to start. But again, with the epidemic of cancer below the age of 50, and then it's, 1 in 2 people eventually will get cancer if you live long enough. And the average age of 64 is when the cancers really ramp up. You want to boost your immune system. So I have all that as a basic protocol, but just an assessment of where you stand now hormonally. Even if you don't have a hormone problem, because later on, if you were to have symptoms, you could go back and look at and say, oh, this is what my hormone was before. Mm-hmm. Now look how it's dropped, just like the testosterone. So you see that it's never too early. And, but start implementing healthy lifestyles, eat the proper foods, the glycemic index less than 80, plant-based, healthy proteins, rotate food groups, every 3 to 4 days, drink water, stay hydrated, tea and coffee are not hydration. Okay. And just avoid those things that are unhealthy as often as you can.
So,
and exercise, 180 minutes a week, they say, of exercise. Now, if you're in my age group and you've never exercised, make sure a cardiologist okays you so you don't run out there and have an accident. Okay.
Yeah. And crawl, walk, run mentality, right? Too. Not just trying to get out there.
High intensity interval training, but don't do crawl, walk, run. In other words, you need to monitor your heart rate too. Yeah. But for those of us that, are in the cardiovascular risk, be sure that you don't have something that you don't want to go out and, run a marathon without being sure.
Yeah. Starting slow, manageable steps, right, and then slowly building on it based on the feedback that you're getting.
A lot of times, see a practitioner like myself will help you negotiate that, and give you, some advice. But your good intentions doesn't mean, the old adage, if it hurts, work through it. That doesn't work at our age. Okay. Don't push it.
So not everybody can come and see you, right? Ideally, that would be. Yeah.
I'm so sorry at this point in time. I love patients, but with my age, these podcasts are wonderful for me. Okay?
Absolutely.
Well, and that's why we're doing Nurse for That, because we're going to
train That's right.
We're going to train up the next generation.
That's right. Let's do it.
Yeah. Nurse for That has telehealth, so anybody anywhere can get access to that. But if somebody's going to go and look for a physician, what would they look for? Endocrinologist? Like what terms would they be
functional medicine? I think the functional medicine is a good place to start, because I 1998, I went to the second ever functional medicine preceptorship, and that was about 30 years ago. And that's when Dr. Bland who is the father of functional medicine, taught that course. And since then, it has exploded, and there are functional medicines. Guys everywhere. They're functional medicine practitioners, all of us. I was like the second one here in this area of the Metroplex, but they're a good place to start. I think that a lot of them are cash only, and I have different feelings about that. I mean, I understand the degree with the reimbursements now, and it's very difficult on these reimbursements. But again, that would be my recommendation.
Yeah. And I mean, my experience is, it's a couple $100 generally, at least initial assessment, that type of thing. And blood tests, are usually a couple $100. Like, it's manageable. You're not having to do all that at once. You kind of space it out over time. It is achievable.
But what we talked about here, you can begin to implement right away. And that's, that's kind of a great percentage of what you need to do anyway. I mean, if you, balance and lower inflammation, your hormones a lot of times will go up. I've seen testosterone. Mine went from the 300s to 577 just by, doing detox things. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that'll happen to everybody, but remember that a lot of times you do not need to take, hormone replacement if you clean the body up and let it work the way it's supposed to.
Yep.
Love it.
That's one of my goals is to get into the detox space and learn more about that. So
And remember, we're not talking about drinking water for 40 days. We're talking about reasonable, detox principles. And I think, Kaylee, you'll be able to highlight that at some point. I'll give you my suggestions. Okay.
Yep. Well, you've got to go to the lake. That's what you do on Fridays.
Gotta reboot the system and get the batteries charged for next week. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for your
balance
time.
life.
You bet.